The problem with conceiving of evil as something external to us is that we inevitably end up fighting it. And the idea is that it's impossible to then ever solve that problem. You will never finish that war. It's a war that one can never win. And actually, to explain that, we have to go back to. We have to be very careful with this topic because, and do justice to it, because it's quite it's not complicated, but it's quite paradoxical. And so, to explain this in a bigger context, first we have to realize that in the beginning we had to take them apart. Good and evil. And good, when you take away one letter, you get God. And evil, when you put the D in front of it, you get the devil. Originally, these opposites had to come apart in order to become conscious. So it was an important thing, and in that sense, we have to say that the church performed an important role in helping us to take them apart. Before the opposites come apart, there is wholeness, but there is still no consciousness. So, to do justice to this, we have to say that the church played a very important role. But a point would come where we had to go beyond that original division, meaning that we would have to grow out of that concept of God in terms of good and evil as being separate and evil as being something external to God, towards a more encompassing or inclusive concept, which would be like the next step. Let's say, not recognizing the importance of the separation. But once we've done that, then we have to realize that now we need to take another step. And to a certain extent, Carl Gustav Jung, played a very important role in understanding that inevitably God had a shadow, the Old Testament God. And in a book he published called The Answer to Job, he basically advanced these ideas, which would be, one could say, the first steps towards the next step, which would be a more inclusive concept of the sacred or the wholeness. And to a certain degree, Jung almost achieved a kind of an integration with the church in a very extensive collaboration or exchange of ideas with a priest called Victor White, whom himself published a book called God and the Unconscious. We could say that there was almost a kind of a connection found between Jungian psychology and the church, but that never crystallized because the church could not accept the idea that evil would originally be also part of God, or that good and evil would be somehow connected. And that's where Jung and White separated, they parted ways.
Okay, why is this difference so important? The difference between God being evil or God being separate from evil.
Right. This is very, very important because originally we're talking about the original oneness and singularity or wholeness that came apart in order to create consciousness. And so originally ultimately we have to return to a conception where everything is one, not violating the idea that a separation was necessary in order to create a sense of discrimination and identity and consciousness. But this is very important because it's to ultimately conceive of evil as something separate to God, to good, would be a fundamental dualism that is not possible. If the original principle is one of wholeness and oneness, you see, so we need to, accepting that a division was necessary, we need to go beyond the idea that evil and good are in some way ultimate principles. Good is not good enough. Just like evil is not evil enough in terms of opposites, and that at some level, when these two connect, we get a kind of a synthesis and we go beyond good and evil, or good or evil.
Are you saying evil does not exist?
What we're saying is that evil is the product of a separation from good. And we're saying that when those two opposites were to reconnect, we would get a higher good or a higher principle beyond good and evil, which would be the paradox, which would be something that is both, but neither in their extremeness. You see, and the problem with evil and good is that the more these two come apart, the more extreme they become, and the more they come closer to each other, the more either loses its edges, so to speak, and you would not have. So the idea would be that towards a union of the opposites, either opposite would change. The closer they get, the more evil would be not evil anymore, and good would be not good anymore, and you would find a kind of a third principle, which would be wholeness, completeness, and that paradox would be the ultimate principle of deity. We wouldn't call that either God anymore or evil, the devil.
But you understand that there's a lot of confusion, that people would get so much obsessed with the shadow that they're going to say that the shadow is good, or going very much into evil, ultimately that is good. You have a word for it, you call it anima obsessed?
Exactly. One of the great dangers in conceiving of a fundamental unity underlying opposites, no matter what opposites, is that people can fall into what we call a kind of a shadow possession. So you can start to, if you say, the evil is part of good, ultimately, then you can fall into a kind of a worshipping of evil, because you would start to realize that evil is also contains, towards its less extreme forms, elements that are important to the whole. So yes, you would get that people would not understand that the idea of a union of opposites would be that we would go beyond either evil and good. The integration, the accepting that evil is part of this ultimate principle or of the paradox, would mean that you go beyond evil. You wouldn't be worshipping evil. You wouldn't be wanting to accept